My biggest kind of advice is like, find something important and like solve it.
Hello and welcome. My name is Darren Russell and I'm just your average creative. On this show, I talk to people from all walks of life about how they use creativity in everything from business through to hobbies to inspire you, the audience, to get out there, dream big, get creative. Continuing my interview with Bethany Koby, we discuss what she has learned building a successful company and how being creative has helped in that journey, as well as all kinds of awesome advice for entrepreneurs and creatives alike. One thing I wanted to sort of go back to as well, because your family's in Los Angeles, you're over in London. Like, I'm originally from Australia. I'm living in Los Angeles. How have you found sort of that distance, and do you try to get back home to see your family with your kids and all of that? Like, do they come and visit? Like, how have you found that, especially running a business, being a mom, all of that stuff? It's a lot going on.
Yeah. So I think there's a few things. I think one is that I have a partner that has very clear priorities. My husband, like, family is the most important thing. And so I think that helps me a lot. It helps ground me and our family. So family is a huge part of our lives. And because our families live far away, we have found all kinds of amazing ways of being close to them, even when we're not together. So we use WhatsApp a lot, we use Skype a lot, we have regular conversations with all of the grandparents and all of the aunts and uncles. So, we are very close in terms of those kinds of things. But also we do go to see my parents at least once a year. We go to see his parents at least once a year, and they come to see us as well. And my mom, because my mom is a former Montessori teacher. Yeah. I mean, she's like an enormous part of our life. She comes and spends the whole summer with us.
Oh, fantastic.
And she also spends at least a month during the holidays, during Christmas as well. So, she comes for long periods of time. And we're both very fortunate that we have parents that are very engaged in our lives and very engaged in our kids' lives. So it is, of course, complicated. It takes effort. But I don't know. I think I see my parents sometimes more than people that parents live just like an hour away. Yeah. So, I think it's less of a distance thing and more of a like mindset and approach thing and what's important to you.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. Like, I find that, like, I'm texting with my parents and my family all the time, like, and Skyping. I Skype with my mum on Fridays every week, and it's those little moments that you find that you can still be very close even though you're not physically in the same area. So I think that's a good approach what you guys got going there. So in the first few years of Tech Will Save Us, what do you think was like the biggest lessons that you learned about your business, your approach? Like, what changed? Like, drastic aha moments kind of thing.
Like in the journey of building the business?
Yeah.
I mean, there are so many. I mean, I know more about everything than I ever thought I'd know. I know more about supply chains and production and manufacturing and I know all this stuff about finance and people and HR. And I mean, I just know so much stuff now because I think maybe some of the most important like lessons or things that have been the most important that I have learned. I think, and I know a lot of people talk about this, but I think hiring and building teams is the most important and probably the hardest thing to do. And I mean, it's an amazing thing and I really enjoy it. And at times I don't enjoy it. At times I find it really overwhelming because people are complicated.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
more so than ever before in history, people bring a lot of expectations to their jobs and to their employers. I think in the past there was a very kind of clear separation between like work and life, and I think there was also like I don't agree with that necessarily. And there was also a weird like, all your employer is required to do is to pay you basically, and I think that has completely changed, right? Like, it's just a completely different expectation now, which I think is amazing. Yeah. But also is a lot to live up to as an organization. People looking for you to provide them with joy and well-being and a paycheck and projects that they love. And, I mean, it's just like, there's so many things. And so I think building a team in a business has been really exciting and really challenging at times. I think the other lesson that I've learned is how important values and culture are in an organization. And I think I've always known this. And I worked in a branding agency before starting it. Technical Davis, I was a creative director for a long time. And obviously, like, one of the things we did was we did values, left, right, and center with the businesses we worked with. But, drafting values and working on values as a consultant is very different than building an organization that has values and culture from the ground up. And I'm really proud of what we did in terms of how we've, created values that underpin our organization. But even with doing all that work, there have been really challenging moments where we just lost integrity around our values, and not because we wanted to or tried to or in any way, allowed it to happen. Things just changed quickly, and certain things lost integrity. And the good thing is that I think me in particular, I'm really sensitive to those things. So we've identified them, we've improved them, and I think we're, definitely on a really good track now. But those things can be very challenging. And just another thing that you have to do, but ultimately you're going to literally kill your business if you don't do them.
Yeah, very important.
And then I think the last thing is actually how important it is for a founder to create boundaries. And I say boundaries very loosely, because I'm definitely not a kind of work-life balance kind of person. That's just not how I am. And I'm definitely not a like work happens here and life happens here, and then no two shall meet ever. That is just not how I am.
Yeah.
But boundaries are healthy, and a sense of self and purpose for a founder that has nothing to do with the business itself, I think is incredibly important. And I only really learned that kind of recently. But I think it's really important. And I've worked a lot on cultivating boundaries and purpose for myself as an individual without the business defining that for me, because so much of the business has defined me for so long. But I think that's really important.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point, because if all your purpose is wrapped up in the business, and if something goes wrong, like, it's devastating.
100%. And every time something goes wrong, it was devastating, right? Everything felt personal, and everything felt like it was physically happening to me. When in fact, most of the things were out of my control, or were just part of change, or some of them were in my control, but I just needed to be okay that they didn't work and move on. And
life happens.
Sometimes exactly. So I think that kind of almost calm separation or boundaries is really, I really strive for that now.
Yeah, that's awesome. And on the sort of the HR side of things, were there some missteps, and how did you kind of address those? Was it like just nip it in the bud? Like, what sort of things did you learn in that side?
So I think one thing we haven't done well is we haven't nipped things in the butt fast enough always. I think historically I particularly probably have definitely had kind of a lot of empathy and wanting to give things like lots of chances and see things improve. And I don't think that's a bad thing. But actually I think maybe it could be a bad thing, because it's not great for that. It's not great for that person if they're not succeeding and not happy and not successful. And it's not great for the business if they're not succeeding and not happy and not successful. So I think we've become much better at identifying when there's a challenge and being much clearer about what the problem is. And then being very clear about how that problem can be solved, whether it's a values problem, like, is it that the person just not in line with our values? Is it one value? Is it all the values? Is it a performance problem? Is it a bit of both of them? And having just really clear, almost unemotional ways to deal with those things, so that it's easier for those people to either improve and stay, or leave and be happier and more
Yeah.
successful.
Yeah.
And I just think we haven't always done that as fast and as effective as we could have. We're way better at it now, but that's because we've made like a million mistakes along
Yeah.
the way.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a skill for sure.
For sure. And you were sort of talking about having empathy and stuff like that for employees. Um, I feel like creative people themselves have a lot of empathy, and they try to picture, like I do myself, and I try to picture myself in other people's situations and stuff. So
Mhm.
coming from being a creative person yourself, starting for as a designer, do you feel like some of that parts of yourself has helped you and given you advantages in funding the company and control, like running it?
For sure. I mean, I approach running a business like a designer, not like a
Mm.
MBA. You know, my org charts were like things of beauty at the beginning of the business. I mean, they literally were these like really complex Illustrator files. That
Right.
is not the case anymore. But I I have always approached creating a business as a design project. You know, it is
Right.
I'm designing an organization, and that design just happens to have people in it and processes in it and rituals in it and values in it and systems in it and tools in it, and I care deeply about all of those things being, you know, efficient and beautiful and enjoyable and representing our values as an organization. So absolutely, I approach the business probably very differently than someone who wouldn't come from the background I come from.
Yeah.
Um, whether it's made me more empathetic or not, I don't know, but I definitely think being a woman and being a mother and having all those experiences has definitely, you know, it creates a sense. Or I particularly personally have felt that it has done it for me. I don't know that all women feel this, but I feel like it definitely creates a kind of nurturing and sensitive approach to how I do things
Right.
that might be different than how another, you know, even another woman thinks that they're attuned to me because of being a woman and being a mother for sure.
Yeah. And I think that's great. So I also presume that in the early stages of the company, you would probably do a lot of the packaging and branding design. How long was it before you could step away from that so that you could take more control, or do you still do it? I'm just curious how that sort of plays out.
Yeah, no, I mean, I did all of it at the beginning. And
Yeah.
then I remember when we did our first like proper packaging project,
Yeah.
um, where we worked with some external people. One, I worked with someone that I knew very well, someone
Got
that
it.
I worked with at Wolf Owens that I trusted and like really loved their approach. And they're, by the way, a way better designer than I am. Like they're amazing. Um, and we also worked with packaging designers that are structurally really like competent, like they understand packaging design and all of the
Right.
really incredible things you can do with packaging to like, you know, eliminate waste and to create, you know, things that fit through the letterbox and blah blah blah. So I just
Got
worked
it.
with people that were better than me at everything,
Yeah.
um, and actually really enjoy that. Like that's a great feeling. Like I could never
Yeah.
have done what we've done alone at all. So I've really enjoyed that. I
Yeah.
have had a lot of input into the brand and the
Yeah.
design as it's evolved for sure. And I continue to, not as much as I used to. I definitely have been able to kind of step away, but I definitely have opinions about it.
Yeah. For sure.
But I also love that the brand and the design can kind of live beyond me. I think it's a really
Yeah.
great thing that it's this kind of living thing now that, you know, new designers can take on and add elements to it that are really playful and fun and interesting and create campaigns that have, you know, themes and topics that push the boundaries of how the brand has ever lived. So
Right.
I look forward to it totally changing as the business grows.
Yeah. That's awesome. And so there's a lot of talk around sort of the importance of education, especially at the college level and stuff. From like a designer perspective, do you think that level of education is important, or do you think that people can teach themselves a lot of stuff on their own and sort of learn as they grow as a designer? Like, what's sort of your thoughts on that? Especially considering you went through a lot of university and like sort of education yourself as well.
So is the question like, is it important to go to university? Like the
Yeah,
question?
yeah, or not just important, but like it's important
Mm.
specifically for designers and that sort of skill based and knowledge as well.
I mean, again, I think every individual is so unique. I think the interesting thing about going to a structured education program is the space it gives you,
Right.
right? I think that is actually maybe the most important thing. I don't think it's the skills. You can probably learn all the skills on all kinds of different platforms and in all kinds of
Yeah.
different ways. I think, well, actually, I think it's two things. I think it's the space it gives you to properly explore and for like
Mm,
emergence to happen, literally emergence, things that you would never have expected to happen because you are absolutely given the space to just explore. And the second thing that I think is really interesting about those kinds of environments is the community and the people that you encounter. There
right.
are, like everyone that has those experiences. I met people that I would have never met otherwise. I had experiences that introduced me to, different kinds of people that I never might have, engaged with otherwise. I had collaborations that I would have never done otherwise. Like I have friends that I would have never met that have been my
Yeah.
friends now for 20 years. So those kinds of things don't happen in the same way if you just learn in different ways. So
Right.
I don't think the reason to go is necessarily what it used to be.
Mm,
Um, but I do think it has value for sure.
right.
But I also think that we're in a society now where like lifelong learning is 100% a thing.
Yeah.
That, I have every intention of, taking courses for the rest of my life. And,
Yeah.
I'm actually going to sign up to take a theoretical physics class this year.
Oh,
I'm
cool.
really interested in theoretical physics and neuroscience. And so I'm going to take some courses this year. It's one of my New Year's resolutions. Um, but I plan on doing that forever. Like I
Yeah.
love learning, and I think the world is such an exciting place because you can learn so easily now because there are so many ways to learn, platforms, workshops.
Yeah.
We're really think name there's a medium for learning now. So yeah, so I think it has a place. I just think it
Yeah.
might be different than it used to be.
Yeah, for sure. And sort of talking about you're doing some more study and stuff like that. Like for me as a creative person, I find I need projects on the outside of my job or what I do for my day to day to just sort of
Mm.
stimulate my creativity and scratch that itch. Do you find that as well for
Mm.
yourself? And like, do you do like other like design projects on the outside
Mm.
or things like that?
I when I first started the business, I talked about this a lot. So my whole career, when I was a creative director and when I was a designer at different organizations, I always had like a portfolio of projects going on at any
Right.
one time. I was always doing side projects. I was designing books. I was working with architects. I was collaborating with like performance artists. I mean, I had all these different projects. I basically had like 5 full-time jobs always.
Right. Yeah.
I just, again, like, I think you're right. Lots of designers love having projects because they give you different kinds of inspiration and different things. So I've always done that until I started Tech Will Save Us.
Yeah.
And the reason was because Tech Will Save Us had so much in it. It
Mm.
was the first time in my whole career where there was so much in it that I didn't need anything outside of it.
Wow.
And that's been the case for the whole time I've been here. I've had little projects here and there, but not because I needed them or, I did little things like as gifts or,
Yeah.
fun little things with my son, but not because I needed like a side project,
Right.
because the business has so much in it. I mean, we make physical products and digital products, we design packaging, we make marketing, communication.
Yeah.
We were, building a little mini factory at one time. There was just so much in it that I didn't need. And
So in an interview I saw of yours from 2017, you sort of said if you're going to be a founder and a parent, you sort of have to have a triangle where like your workplace,
mm-hmm.
your house,
Yeah,
and your kid's school are sort of all within
yeah,
like walking or biking distance.
yeah.
The time since then, has that sort of any of that thinking evolved? Have you like what else have you learned about that creating that balance in your life, especially as the business has grown?
That was a very good idea, and I'm really glad we did it. That's what we still have a triangle, and
Yeah.
I can still walk or cycle to my son's school and my new son's nursery, our house,
Oh,
and our
wow.
it means that our life is really manageable,
Yeah.
and our quality of life, as hard as we work and as challenging as it can be to build a business and run a business, it means that we can have a quality of life with our family that is really
Mm.
important. And if you cannot, as a founder, if you cannot create the kinds of flexibility and the kinds of structures that make you happy, then I think you've missed a trick for sure. I
Yeah.
think sometimes founders think that we have to sacrifice, which we do. And by the way, we
Yeah.
sacrifice a lot. But if you can't find some joy and like structural things that actually give you the kind of flexibility that or whatever it is you need, there's a flaw in the in the design of what you're doing.
Yeah. And talking about that, like, has there been times that you found that you're stretched too thin? And because I'm sure there's always a lot of priorities pulling at you. How do you
Totally.
handle those moments?
um I think there's a few things. I think when we first started, those moments would kind of sneak up on us, as
Right.
opposed to we knew they were coming or we were planning for them. I think now we just know so much more, and we're so much more like on top of things, and have an amazing team that's on top of things, that most of the time things don't sneak up on us. I mean, there's definitely
Yeah.
still surprises, but we're just really good at being resilient and like responding to things in a way better way than ever before. Um, in terms of when those moments happen and the kind of, how stretched I feel, sometimes it's like mentally I feel stretched because there's just some
Right.
big chunky hairy thing that we have to solve. And so I have to make sure that I keep my like personal practices, happening. So
Yeah.
I write, I journal every morning. I've journaled
Right.
every morning for like, I guess almost 3 years now.
Oh, great.
Um, I have a meditation practice now. I exercise.
Yeah.
So there's like practices that I have that are really important to my sense of like well-being.
Got
So
it.
no matter how busy I am, if those things are in place, I somehow feel like I can handle it.
Yeah.
I think when I get stretched in terms of time, I think that's about support. We're very
Yeah.
fortunate that we have a nanny, and we've had our
Right.
nanny since my son was 4. I mean, she's like part of our family now, and
Yeah.
I feel so fortunate to have her in our life. I still feel so fortunate for who she is, because she is just incredibly flexible and incredibly giving. And she has meant that in those moments when I'm really busy, like actual time, like I
Yeah.
have to be somewhere all the time, that I feel like my family is not being sacrificed, and that they're with someone that loves them. And I trust fully. And so that has meant a world of difference. We live in a city and we have no family in the city. So we've had to find
Yeah.
other ways of creating support structures.
Yeah. That's
So that's how I deal with it.
no, that all sounds like the right way to go. So thinking about being a creative and starting a business, would you have any advice?
I think for a long time there was this thing where designers only started design studios.
Yeah, for sure.
I remember this, and I think what's great now is that that's not the case. That I think designers now see themselves as, not only the solvers of other people's problems, or, the supplier of design, but actually the creator of solutions, which I think is fantastic. And I'm, really excited to see more designers look at the world and find ways of solving, some of the biggest problems through design
Yeah,
ultimately. So I guess my biggest kind of advice is like, find something important and like solve it, like
solid.
like
Yeah.
literally like find it and find a way of solving it. um I would also say, and this is, not to be too generalized, I think it depends. Not all designers are like this, but I do think that sometimes designers can have kind of blinders a little bit,
Right.
as to how to solve problems. And sometimes, myself included, I've let, aesthetics or certain things lead as opposed to other things. So I do think it's important that designers really think about their tools and the way they know how to solve things, and find and learn all kinds of different approaches to how to solve problems, whether that be things like lean UX, or whether that be things like customer-centered research, or whether that be, things like processes and systems design. I think the world of design is broad now, and designers owe themselves the service to really explore all the kinds of ways that design can solve problems. That they don't get in their own way of like actually solving the problem. And then I think the last thing in terms of like, starting a business or building something, and I think this is very topical. I think there's a misconception that if you start a business, you have to get funding.
Right. Yeah.
I get asked all the time, and like my husband and I were just talking about this last night. I guess all the time, like, how did you raise money, and how did you do funding, and I've started this thing, and should I raise money, and blah blah blah. And I think there's like a badge of honor. It seems like if you raise funding, somehow you're successful, and that's completely not the case. Like,
for sure,
there are amazing businesses that are very successful and really have grown and built great things that have never raised any money ever and have no one's money in their businesses at all. And there are some amazing businesses that have built businesses with other people's money. And there are some businesses that have gotten loans, and there's some businesses that have gotten grants. And I just don't think that this weird perception that if you've raised money, somehow like your business is better, or you're a better founder, or whatever. I think that's just crazy. I think most importantly is to know what your business model is. To know your ambition in terms of like, what kind of business do you want to build? Is it a business that, is going to like become the size of Facebook? Is it a business that's going to be, it's going to really change the world? Is it a business that's just going to provide a lifestyle for you and your employees? And all of those are valid businesses. And all of them need different kinds of funding. And it's important that what you want and what the potential is are aligned, because some people don't want to build a big Facebook business, but the kind of business they're building should be a big Facebook business. Like how many very small like social media platforms do you know? None. Because it's not really a sustainable model. So I think it's important to understand what the model is, and what that model requires in terms of scale, and then what that model requires in terms of like cash. Because that's really important. So I think that would be my.
No, that makes sense to me. So as you've been learning business, like you say, you didn't come from an MBA background or anything like that. Did you lean on any sort of business books or resources? And do you have any recommendations around those that people might be able to use?
I mean, I have read hundreds of books, thousands of books. I've listened to hundreds of podcasts. I have a business coach. I have advisors. I have amazing investors. I have a network of incredible founders that I have asked a billion questions to. I mean, it takes a village, right? It really does. And I'm one of those people that is not afraid to ask for help and ask questions, and I rely on other people a lot. So I have absolutely built networks around myself, and by no means ever assumed that I knew the answers. So I am a voracious reader. And I, read lots of things, and I watch lots of things. So I have many, many different recommendations. I think there's a few that are just kind of like universal ones. So one of the books, and I think a lot of founders will echo this. There's a gentleman named Patrick Lencioni who's written a bunch of different books, which are just like universally excellent books about business and management and leadership. So everyone in our business, when they start working for us, get a book called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team.
Oh, cool.
And it's just a classic. I mean, they're terrible names and they're really poorly designed, but the principles are just universal and they're great. So his books and him is just an awesome, I highly recommend everyone that wants to start a business or is starting a business and is running a business to read all of his books. I recently read a book called Traction, which I actually thought was which I actually thought was really a really good refresher or reminder of the kind of things that need to be in place kind of operationally in order for things to kind of run smoothly. And I think you can never stop reminding yourself of those things.
Yeah.
Because they change and because you lax in some ways, and some things might feel like they're right, and then all of a sudden you realize they're not right anymore. So I think those things, I'm always constantly refreshing my, I guess, repertoire of things.
Yeah.
I think that there are some podcasts that I really, I'm just looking at my phone so that I can remember some of them. I think there are some podcasts that I really enjoyed listening to, and that great alternative, like tools. I think there's like Recode Decode is always a good one, because it's constantly, how people have built things is super, super fascinating.
Yeah.
There's a podcast called Kid Tech, which is run by, which I really love. It's super focused on kids businesses, and they've done like really wonderful interviews with all kinds of people from the kids space, from people that are in, the head of digital at Lego, all the way to me, to people that are building, new media businesses. I really love those podcasts. And then there's another podcast that I love, which is called Exponential View, which is run by someone in my community named Azim Azhari. And Azim is an amazing guy who's a consultant, and he's just an incredible guy. And Exponential View is all about technologies in the future. And so his podcast and his newsletter are really exceptional. They tackle everything from like super viruses to AI to climate change to, just massive, enormous topics. And he has incredible experts, and he breaks them down in ways that make them, he doesn't try and like pretend like anything is solved. He just bring them to light in incredibly intelligent ways. And I really like enjoy reading like his I enjoy listening to his podcast and reading his newsletters every Sunday. So I think those are just some of the things that I've really enjoyed recently.
Got it. So we're starting to run out of time pretty much, but my last question that I kind of wanted to talk about was, I saw sort of towards the end of last year that you had a interesting run-in with BT, the giant communications company, or telecom basically, because they use the slogan "Technology will save us" as their like a big marketing push. Can you tell us a little bit about that? I saw recently that there's been some sort of nice resolution. So run us through that a little bit if you can.
So the BT thing was quite an interesting situation. Like, obviously one of those things you could never predict. Basically the whole thing started, literally like one morning I woke up and I had like 100 emails and texts from people either saying, "Congratulations on your partnership with BT," or "WTF." And that's basically how I found out. I had photographs of people sitting on the tube holding the Evening Standard with like a giant headline that said "Tech will save us," or people like driving on the highway with a giant billboard that said "Technology will save us." So it was a crazy situation. And I guess what happened was ultimately a mistake. And it was not in any way meant intentionally malicious. However, it was still a mistake, and that's not okay. And so we were able to engage BT through a series of things that happened, including the Sunday Times writing an article about it. That then basically ensured that we were talking to decision makers in the business.
Fantastic.
That ultimately allowed us to discuss with them a outcome or a solution that could help to rectify the situation in a way that was amenable to both of us. And so what that looked like was a joint statement about what had happened, so that we had a very engaged community that was pretty outraged about what happened. Which was really amazing. I'll talk about that in a second. And so it was a joint statement about what had happened. They had provided us with a very large media package over the holidays, so we could leverage some of BT's breadth and power, and use that to kind of raise awareness, which was really great. And we've also started to have conversations with their team that is in charge of what they call Skills for Tomorrow, which is their initiative around empowering 5 million kids to have digital skills. And so we're now, we've had a meeting with them, and we would love to obviously work with them around doing what we've always done, but through the power of BT. So that's basically where we're at with BT. And the thing I learned from that situation, which was completely not at all what I expected to learn, what I learned was how important community is for businesses.
Yeah.
And community is not customers. Community is that are engaged in your organization. And what I learned is that we have that. This thing happened, and all of a sudden, like, our Twitter account was just like crazy with people talking about what had happened, and some people being very outraged, and others wondering what had happened and how this was allowed to happen, and others that were saying things like, I read technology will save us on a BT ad, and I'm dubious, and I see it on a box with an amazing product for kids, and I really believe in it. Isn't it amazing how language can be so different? So really amazing comments. And I realized just how important and how incredible it is that we've not just built customers, but we've built a community. So that was a really great thing to kind of realize in that experience.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And it must be like heartwarming that you've come so far, and I'm sure there's been ups and downs, but to have that sort of community support at a time when you needed it is a big like kudos to what you've sort of built.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it was, again, an unexpected thing, but it did feel, really wonderful that, we were not alone in being like ridiculous in our assessment of the situation. And two, that there were a lot of people that felt the same and wanted something positive to come from it.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. All right, so I'm going to wrap up here and just want to sort of see if there's anything you wanted to promote, or how people can like follow you and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, if any of the listeners have kids or kids in their lives, we have an amazing collection of so many interesting experiences for kids from 4 all the way to 11. And our newest product, I think, is maybe, all of our new products are my favorite. But one of our new products is called the Arcade Coder, and it's a device that helps kids to learn how to become games designers. And it is by far, I think, one of the best things we've ever made. So I really encourage people to try it. It's a really fun and great product. And they can find it at techwillsaveus.com or on Amazon. And they can follow us at Tech Will Save Us on Twitter, on Instagram, and Facebook.
Very cool. Okay, well, Bethany, I just wanted to thank you for joining me on the podcast, and I've really enjoyed meeting you. Yeah, of course.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to my interview with Bethany Koby. You can subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, or you can also watch it on my YouTube channel. If you love what I'm doing here, be sure to share it with someone else that you think will like it. And tune in for more great content about creativity, entrepreneurship, and tech. I'm Darren Russell, just your average creative. See you next time.